Welcome to Shahnameh, Book of Kings. Today we continue with the reign of Kesra Nushin-Ravan. The King of Kings, Nushin-Ravan, may his name live forever, always kept learned men and priests at his court, and they were an adornment to his reign. They were eloquent doctors, scholars, nobles, men skilled in various professions. One such was the doctor Borzui, who was advanced in his skills and an eloquent speaker. He had some expertise in every branch of knowledge, and was famous throughout the world for this. One day, during a royal audience, he came before the king and said, "Your Majesty, you love knowledge, and your inquiring mind delights in learning things. Today, my spirit was alert and at ease, and I read in an Indian book that a plant grows in the mountains that looks like silk from Byzantium. If someone gathers this plant and prepares it in the correct way and then sprinkles it on the dead, they will begin to talk. Now, with the king's permission, I shall make this difficult journey. I shall employ all my knowledge to see if I can find this wonder. If a corpse can live again, this is only to be expected now that Nushin-Ravan rules the world." The king responded, "This is not possible, but we should inquire into it nevertheless. Take a letter from me to the ruler of India and study the nature of these Indian idol worshippers. Find a companion for this search and ask good fortune to help you too. These mysterious words you've read perhaps point to some new wonder in the world. Take all your requests to the Indian king. You will certainly need him to provide you with a guide." Then Nushin-Ravan threw open the gates to his treasury and provided Borzui with 300 camels laden with royal goods, gold coins, brocades, silks, seals, crowns, musk, and ambergris. Borzui set off and arrived at the Indian court, where he handed over his king's letter and spread the goods he had brought before the Rajah. After reading the king's letter, the Rajah said, "Kesra has no need to send me presents in this way. My people in my realm are themselves presents he has bestowed on me. Given his just rule and far his glory and good fortune, it would be no surprise if the world ruler could resurrect the dead. The Brahmins who live in the mountains will help you carry out your plan. My vizier, my wealth, my treasury, and all that's good and evil in India are at your disposal. I measure my greatness by how I am able to aid you." They provided him with suitable apartments close to the Rajah, as well as with a cook, food, fine clothes, and carpets. He spent that night with the wise men of Kanauj, discussing his plans. When day broke over the mountains and the world-illuminating torch appeared, the Rajah summoned his learned doctors and those who could offer advice. Borzui set off for the mountains on foot with a knowledgeable guide, and the doctors accompanied him. He gathered plants that were dry, fresh, withered, or flourishing, and he made various concoctions from them. But when he sprinkled these on the dead, not a single corpse came to life, and it was clear that the mixture was powerless. Though he walked over the whole mountain, his efforts were fruitless, and he knew that the dead could be revived only by that king who is eternal and rules all things. He was tormented by the pains of his journey, by the shame he would feel from the king and the courtiers, by thoughts of the wealth that had been given to the Rajah, and by the foolish things he had said. He was sick at heart when he remembered the book he had read and said to himself, "Why did that foolish, senseless man write such ridiculous things, which could only lead to trouble and reproaches?" He turned to the learned man who had accompanied him and said, "You are experienced, well-regarded men. Do you know of anyone more knowledgeable than yourselves who might outdo you in wisdom?" They all agreed on their answer. "There is an old sage who surpasses us in both years and wisdom, and who is more knowledgeable than every master." Borzui replied, "You are noble and magnanimous men, and I ask you to take me yet more trouble and to guide me to this sage. It may be that this eloquent and old wise man can help me in my search." As they led him to this man, Borzui's heart was preoccupied with worries, his mind with what he would say, When he met him, he eloquently described his troubles that had begun with the book he had read and with the words he had heard from various savants. The old man spoke to him about the different kinds of knowledge and then said, "When I was young, I also read the book you mentioned, and like you, began to look for this same plant. My time was vainly spent until I saw that someone else was meant. Let me explain. The plant that you have tried so hard to find is speech. The mountainside is knowledge, and the corpse is any man who's ignorant, since only knowledgeable men can give life to us. If there's no knowledge there, you won't find life within us anywhere. The plant you seek's a book called Kalileh. Its language is the guide to wisdom's way. You'll find this book if you search carefully, locked away in the Raja's treasury." Borzui was overjoyed when he heard these words, and it seemed to him that all his troubles disappeared like the wind that blows and is gone. He called down blessings on the sage and hurried to the court, traveling as fast as fire. When he reached the Raja, he bowed down before him and said, "May you live for as long as the world remains. Great king, there is a book called in the Indian tongue, Kalileh. It's kept under seal in your treasury, in the archives there, and it is a guide to wisdom. If it will cause you no distress, I ask that you order your treasurer to give this book to me." The king's soul was upset at this request, and for a while he pondered what he should do. Then he said to Borzui, "No one has ever asked me for this, but if King Nushin-Ravan wanted my body or my soul, or any of my nobles or subjects, I could not withhold any of them from him. But read the book here, from beginning to end, so that those who hate me cannot say that I allowed it to be copied." Borzui replied, "I want no more than your wish to grant me your majesty." The king's treasurer brought the book of Kalileh and Demna and guided Borzui throughout it. Throughout the day he committed to memory whatever he read, and went over it again at night until the dawn broke. He was delighted by the book, and he washed his soul in its wisdom. He secretly wrote the book out in Persian, and this is how it was sent to Nushin-Ravan. As soon as Nushin-Ravan's reply came, saying, "The ocean of knowledge has reached us," Borzui went to the Raja and asked for permission to return home. The Raja made much of him and gave him an Indian robe of honor, 2 costly bracelets and 2 sets of earrings, a torque set with royal gems, an Indian turban and Indian sword made of iron that glittered like silver. And Borzui left Kanuj, having learned a great deal in its high spirits. When he arrived home, he made his obeisance before the king, told him what he had seen and heard at the Raja's court, and explained that the plant he had sought had been knowledge. The king said to him, "You have done well, and the book of Kalileh has given my soul new life. Take the keys from my treasure and choose whatever you wish." Borzui went to the treasury, but he gave the treasurer little enough to do. There were gold and jewels to right and left, but he wanted no more than a suit of royal clothes. He clothed himself in fine fabrics and quickly made his way back to Kesra's court. As he bowed before the throne, the king said to him, "You have been through so much, so why did you leave my treasury without taking either money or jewels? A man who has endured a great deal deserves a great deal." Borzui replied, "A man who wears his king's clothes has found the way to good fortune and the throne of greatness. And then unworthy men will see these clothes, and their evil hearts will be darkened, while our friends' faces will rejoice in our good fortune. I have one request of the king, and this is so that I shall be remembered in the world. When Bozorjmehr writes out this book, may he recall the trouble that Borzui took to obtain it. If the victorious king so commands, may he start the book with a mention of me, so that after I die, learned men will not forget the difficulties I went through." The king said, "This is a noble desire, one that is fitting for a man with a free spirit. Your words exceed your station, but they are justified by the pains you have taken." Then he said to Borzojmehr, "This request should not be denied." And when the scribe had cut his pen and was ready to write, he began his account with a mention of Borzui. This copy was a royal one, and the book existed only in Pahlavi script at that time. It was kept with care in the king's treasury so that no one unworthy person could look at it. It was read in Pahlavi until men spoke Arabic, and then the Caliph Mamun renewed the book so that its sun could shine on other men. He had the heart of a learned priest and the mind of Khayanid kings, and he was skilled in all kinds of knowledge. Kalileh was translated into Arabic in the form in which you now hear it recited. It remained in Arabic until the time of King Nasser. His vizier and his librarian was Abu Fazil, and he gave orders that the book be translated into Persian and Dari, and so the matter was settled. Then Nasser was guided by wisdom and desired that there might remain some memorial to himself in the world. He had a man recite the whole book to Rudiki, who strung its rich pearls, turning prose into verse. For a man who is literate, this is an added ornament to the tales, and for the ignorant it is a blessing. Verse satisfies both the soul and the mind. Now, hear what happened to Borzojmehr, who was raised from the earth to the heavens and brought down to base earth again by the same man who had raised him up. One day Kesra rode out from Ctesiphon to hunt horned sheep and deer on the plain. The flock of sheep dispersed, leaving Kesra behind, and he came on a grassy spot shaded by trees. Borzojmehr was with him, keeping him company out of affection and in order to serve him. The king dismounted, intending to rest. None of his servants were nearby, but the one kind face that was there was enough. He stretched out and turned from side to side on the grass. Then he laid his head down, with Borzojmehr watching him from a little way off. The king always wore an armband encrusted with jewels, and he lay sleeping, his arm with it uncovered. A blackbird swooped down from the skies, perched beside the sleeping king, saw the jewels on his naked arm. The bird saw no one there. The men in the king's entourage were off hunting by themselves, and the sleeping king seemed to be alone, with no one nearby to advise him. Seeing the armband, the bird pecked open the jewel settings, and as the precious pearls and topazes fell out, he ate them, one by one, and then he flew up and disappeared from sight. Borzojmehr's heart was filled with foreboding at what the heavens has brought. He knew that fate brings prosperity and hardship, and that now a time of hardship had come. When the king woke and saw Borzojmehr biting his lip, he thought that this man whom he had treated so well had acted disrespectfully toward him, and said, "You dog! Who told you a man's nature could be hidden? I'm not some celestial being like Hormazd or Bahman. My body is made of earth, fire, and air." But all the king tried out his tongue, reproaching Borzojmehr, he received no answer from him but sighs. Borzojmehr seemed to shrivel away before his king and the turning heavens, because he had seen the signs of his downfall, and in his fear the wise counselor remained silent. The soldiers in the king's entourage were now all around the meadow where their master had rested. The king mounted his horse and looked at no one on the way back to his palace. He bit his lip as he rode, and when he dismounted, he muttered to himself in anger. He ordered his men to harden their hearts against the vizier and to confine him to his palace. Borzojmehr sat in his palace, deprived of the king's favor. One of his relatives, a young, energetic man who waited on King Nushin-Ravan, lived there with him. This man followed Nushin-Ravan about his palace and was quite forward in his conversations with the king. One day, Borzojmehr asked him how he served the king, and told him he should look for ways to improve his skills. The servant replied, "You are our chief priest, so let me tell you what happened today." So after he finished eating, I went forward and I poured water into his hands, and he found the floor was wet from my ewer. He looked at me with such fury that I said to myself, I'll never eat or sleep again. When the king of the world becomes angry with me like that, my hand holding the ewer went weak, and I dropped it. Borzojmehr said to him, Go and get some water, and pour it as you did over the king's hands. The young man brought warm water, and bit by bit poured it over the hands of the vizier, who said, Next time, when you pour the water for him to wash his hands, try to do it smoothly, with no violent movement, and when the king raises his hands to touch his lips with perfume, stop pouring. Next day, when King Nushin-Ravan was eating, the young man stood there filled with apprehension, until once again he had him bring the ewer and basin for the king to wash his hands. He performed his task just as the knowledgeable vizier had told him, pouring the water not too slowly, not too quickly. The king said to him, Your service has improved. Who taught you how to do this? He answered, Borzojmehr taught me how to do this properly in the way the king has just seen. The king said, Go to that clever man and ask him, What evil nature was it, what despicable ambition made you choose to sink down from the splendid and honorable rank you held? Hearing the king's words, the young steward ran to his uncle with grief in his heart. He told him what the king had said, and Borzojmehr quietly answered him, In ways that can be seen and in ways that cannot be seen, my state is finer than the king's. The servant went back to the king and told him what Borzojmehr had said. Nushin-Ravan started up in fury and ordered that Borzojmehr be chained in a dark pit, and then told the servant to ask this foolish man how his days passed when he was imprisoned in this way. With his face covered in tears, the young man asked Borzojmehr the king's question, and the good man's answer was, My days pass more easily than the king's do. The messenger ran to the king like the wind and told him what Borzojmehr's answer was. The king raged like a leopard. He drove all love for Borzojmehr from his heart and ordered that he be imprisoned in a metal chest with spikes on the inside and with his head held in iron bands. He could not rest by day or stretch out to sleep at night. His body was in constant pain, and his heart was in torment. After 4 days, the king of the world said to his servant, Go to that wise man once more. Be quick, taking my message and bringing his answer. Ask him how he finds his body now that its shirt is made of sharp spikes. But when the servant gave him the obstinate king's message, Borzojmehr said to the young man, My better days are better than Nushin-Ravan's days. Nushin-Ravan's face turned pale when he heard this reply. He chose a man in the palace who was honest and would understand what Borzojmehr meant by his words. With him he sent an executioner and said, Go and say to this malignant man that either he returns me a proper answer, not some foolishness about the spike-lined chest where he's chained, being better than a king's throne, or this executioner will use his sword to show him how day of judgment will arrive. The man came to Borzojmehr, and his heart was moved to pity by the sage's plight. He repeated the king's words for Borzojmehr, who said, Whether our lot is vile or glorious, fortune has never shown her face to us. But king or commoner, we know that we must leave this earth soon for eternity. No man has an abiding foothold here, and good or bad, our life will disappear. Then kings know fear and cling to life and grief, but wretchedness is never hard to leave. The messenger and the executioner returned to their proud sovereign and told him what they heard. The king's heart was troubled by this answer, and he gave orders that Borzojmehr be taken from his prison to his palace again. And so the heavens turned for a while. Borzojmehr's face became wrinkled. His wealth could not assuage his grief, and he wasted away in sorrow. And here is where I end my tale for today. But I'll be back tomorrow with more tales, many more tales. Until then, my friends.